Hello and happy Winky and Hump Day. Say hi. She said, yeah. She's all yelling at me because I'm trying to do a video and she says, no, it's cat time. So anyway, I finally, hello everybody. I got the tools that I said I was going to show you. And there's the one I already showed you. So I'm going to do this real quick. What I'm going to show you is those bad parts that I told you about that I was going to disassemble. I'm going to give you a real quick rundown on how to disassemble those things, how to clean up the solder a little bit, and then after I'm done explaining here, then I'm going to flip the camera around so you'll just see my hands, so you get a real close view of how it's done, and I will show you the textbook method of doing it, and then I'll show you my little tricks of how to take stuff apart in a way that's a little quicker and a little bit better. But and I'll show you a cattail. There you go. There's a cattail. So let me do that real quick. I will turn this thing around and we'll get started. Thanks. All right. So here we are with no head and just my hands. So gotta love that. So what I'm going to start with here is I'm going to start with getting the rest of the tools out that I was supposed to get out a minute ago, and I didn't do that. So let's do that real quick. So to start with, I'm going to show you how to take the solder braid and put it to use, and what it does, and what it actually is a wicking. It's a wicking substance, a wicking device that will draw the solder away from the connection with heat. And because of heat flow, the way that the thermodynamics work, it'll do that. So what you have to do is you have to get a little bit of flux and solder on the tip of the soldering iron so that you have good heat conductivity, but just enough that you get it really nice and shiny like that. And then you take the wick, you pick where you're gonna use the soldering iron. You get the solder hot to where it starts to pool, and then you put the solder wick on it and put the wick in between the soldering iron and the solder that you just heated up, and then draw it side to side, and what you'll end up with is the wick with solder on it. Now the method here doesn't lend itself to large components like this very well doing that. So what I'm going to do is show you real quick with this one, and I'll get it spun around here so that you can see this wire, and I'm going to cut this wire off real quick. So if you've got a wire like that, you can take the wick and do the same thing just like that. And it takes a little bit of pressure, but you wiggle it around like that, and you'll see that most of the solder came off on the wick, and the component is free of solder, and the hole's clean. So that's the whole point with the wick, is that it takes the solder out of the hole that you need to put the new wire in. So you could use it just like that, it's fine, but I'll show you some other ways of doing that. But the other method here, and keep this rather short and brief for you guys. The other method here is this, and I'm going to take that little puddle right there, and I'm going to tilt this in such a way that you can sort of see it, if I can tilt it. My brand new tools here. So tilt it like that. I'm going to show you what the solder sucker does. Now what this thing is, it's a plunger mechanism inside here with a little vacuum tip, and it's just a plastic tube. And you activate it, you pull this down, locks in place, and you've got a little trigger mechanism there. So the idea is that you get, again, you have to put some solder on the tip to get the heat to conduct properly. So you get your solder heated up on whatever component you're going to remove the solder from. And this tool works best for a circuit board, but I'm going to demonstrate it here. And once you get it pooled up like that, you stick this thing right in it and pop the trigger. And it pulled some of the solder off. It's hard for you to see that, but the way you can tell that it works is when you do that, solder comes out of the end of it. So when you push it, rod, you'll pull solder out of there. So a better way to demonstrate that would be for me to take something like this and show you real quick. With that hole, I can fill that hole with solder, just like that. Just completely fill it up. So now you see the hole's closed. I don't know if you get a good view of that in the camera, but you can see that hole's closed. So now we engage the solder sucker. Get some solder on the tip and get that thing heated up. And it takes a little bit of concentrating on not being shaky. But when you get it smoking like that, then you pop that little trigger right there that you can see. And you see the hole's empty. Just as quick as that. Some people prefer the solder sucker. And here's the solder. And you can see even smoke coming out of it because it's still hot. But some people prefer these solder suckers. They're not very much money, and they do work. I personally don't like them. I prefer to use the wick. It's just my preference. So in some cases, the wick is a little bit better to use because it's a little bit more controllable. Either one of those will work on a circuit board, but like I said, it's personal preference. I find that for delicate components, the wick works a little bit better. When you get the wick like this, what you have to do with it then is clip off the part that has solder in it and let it go flying across your workbench until you lose it in a crack somewhere. And then you get a clean tip like that. If you leave the solder on there and try to reuse it, it won't work because it's already full. This is a heat conductive wicking element, so it has to be clean. So you got to clip it off. As long as you activate the solder sucker like that and you push the tip out, it will keep itself clean. The one thing that you need to remember when you're desoldering stuff is to watch how hot you get it. You don't want to overheat things when you're pulling them apart or you'll damage them and make them unusable. So I have come up with a couple of methods that I'm going to share with you. They're kind of simple and stupid, but they work. So one of them is simply this, is you're going to take that capacitor off of there and you just grab it with a pair of pliers. Don't squeeze it so hard that you damage it, and just pull that wire off from where it's located, which is right there. You can see how I'm doing that. Just pop it right off of there. And it's, in this particular application, this thing's not bolted to anything. It would normally be bolted to a guitar when you do that. But that capacitor is reusable. And then once you get it like that, you can even hold it with your fingers because you're not holding the wire. And you can do the same thing here. You can just heat that up over here and just pull it off like that. And it comes off clean. So, and then you can use the solder wick to clean it up. But I'm going to show you a little bit of a I guess nonchalant way of doing this is use a piece of paper towel, as long as you don't get it on fire. I use a washcloth most of the time. But you literally just take the component that you got here, and when you're doing this, like I said, this is my method. It's an unorthodox way of doing this. Be careful that you don't sling solder on yourself, because you might. It won't hurt you badly, but it'll sting and it doesn't feel real good. So don't do that, and definitely wear glasses and don't get it in your eye, because it will get in your eye. So you simply heat up what you're going to heat up. You want to get that wire off there and just knock it off of there. And then just take this right here and just literally wipe it away like that, because you're not getting the component very hot. You see the solder's just dropping off. All right, and you can kind of sling it like that, get it off of there. And when you go to reuse the component, you're going to want some solder on there anyway, because you have to pre-tin it. So if you clean it up like so, you could actually use this component just like that. because those are pre-10 for the next wires that you're going to reinstall there. So that's just a simple little knock the solder off kind of method. And like I said, they do get a little warm. So you can do that way. Same thing with this. You can just knock that off of there. Now I'm going to show you something else. I'm going to let that cool just for demonstration purposes. But if you've got one of these components, these potentiometers, where one of the holes is plugged up full of stuff, there's a little trick you can do with that too. And take one of these little picks. Instead of using the solder sucker or the solder wick, you just get that nice and hot and just kind of brush that, whatever's in there, wire, whatever it is, kind of brush it around until it's kind of out of the way. And you get the thing warm and just punch that right through there, just like that. And then wiggle it around and let it cool off. Take 4 or 5 seconds. So you end up with that. And you can take your dikes and side cutters for those people that don't want to be offensive to certain folks that don't like to be called that. We did that in the aircraft hangar. These things have been called dikes for 70, 100 years. And somebody at the aircraft hangar said, you can't do that anymore. So I got written up one time because I called them alternative lifestyle pliers. They got mad at me. So doesn't pay to be a smarty pants. But anyway, so you take your side cutters if you want to be correct about it. Get that all cleaned up. Just like that. And then you end up with that little spot like I told you. It's plugged up. Get it nice and hot. Stick that in there, wiggle it around. Just like new. Clean as can be. Real simple. And it doesn't overheat the component. That potentiometer is still usable, and I may actually use it. It's still salvageable. That came out of a Fender Precision Bass. But I just wanted to show you a couple little methods there. There's a few other little tricks that I'll show that have to do with circuit boards and things like that, and I'll demonstrate those when I get to the circuit board. But even the capacitor is still usable. So anyway, let me flip this around real quick. All right, so there we are. So that's a little trip down solder world. Like I said, it's just a real quick rundown of the basics of how to take stuff apart. The other day we visited how to make a good solid solder joint. This is some methods that, I mean, some of it seems pretty obvious, but it's not obvious if you haven't done it, or if you've had mistakes, or you've been frustrated with it. Some of it is very, very simple stuff that nobody tells anybody. So that kind of thing. But as far as like the solder sucker, like I said, I prefer to use the wick myself. This stuff. That's a personal preference. There's really no situation that I've run across, and even in my training with the aircraft solder training, where one of these is preferential to the other one. They both do the same job. I don't particularly like to use the solder sucker too much. It works well. It works quickly. It's a bit cumbersome for what I find. The wick, you can actually pull it off. You can cut a piece off and hold it with a pair of needle nose pliers to get into some really tight spots. And I've just found that it's a little bit more useful when you're dealing with a guitar where you're in a compartment that's this big, maybe even smaller than that, or when you're dealing with a circuit board where you're in between components. You don't necessarily want to touch two of them, just the one in the middle. And sometimes you can't get this thing into an area where three of those are sitting side by side. So it's just my personal preference. I've found that this thing's a bit cumbersome. Nothing wrong with it. If you prefer to use this, if you practice with it and you find that it works well for you, then use it. It's all up to personal preference. But so that's a little bit of a how we disassemble stuff, how we get a clean. I'll try to get that in the camera a little better than what I had a minute ago. How we get a clean finish on it and the holes cleaned out. And that right there is basically pretend for the new wires. It is a serviceable salvage component. And with a little bit of practice, you can do that. And you saw it doesn't take me very long to do it. Make sure your solder iron is warm. Make sure that it's, when you warm it up, you dip it in the flux. When it starts to smoke a little bit, it's right at the temperature it needs to be. Give it about another 2 or 3 minutes, and then it's ready for you to use it. It gives it a little bit more heat in the tip of it, and then want to keep it that way. So that's pretty much the rundown on how you take it apart. So the next thing that we're going to investigate here, or learn how to do, is we're going to learn how to do a couple of different kinds of wire joints to make wire splices. How do we attach the wires to this? Because just like a lot of things, you want a like a wire nut in a house wiring. The wire nut isn't the attachment. The twisting of the wires together is the attachment. The wire nut is to ensure that that twist doesn't come apart. So the same applies here. You want to have a solid, in these, you want to have a solid connection between the wire and the potentiometer lugs. And the case of the ground here is kind of basically just glued on there. But the solder will glue it in place. But there's several different methods of attaching the wires here. So if the solder cracks, flakes off, whatever, if you get a cold solder joint, the wire will stay. So I'm going to show you how to do that when we start getting into how to put the guitar components together so that the wires stay put, they don't come apart. You get a good solid vibration-free connection. And then once we learn that, then the next step will be actually assembling the electronics for a guitar and showing step by step how it goes together. Some of the methods of how I run the wiring, why I run it that way, things like that. My guitars, I was talking about how they're different from a lot of the off-the-shelf guitars. One of the other things that I've kept kind of a secret to myself, it's really not a secret, but it sort of is. It's you can look it up and find other people doing a similar method, but I'm very particular about where I run the wires. I learned that in vacuum tube amplifier design and modification. It's very careful. You have to be very careful where you run wires that carry an audio signal. They need to be shielded. They need to be also interrupting a magnetic signal that may be nearby, so the wires get twisted, just like in a vacuum tube amp. So there's certain things that I do inside a guitar that are a little bit unusual from what you would see in a manufacturer's guitar. But like I said, people pick my guitars up and go, wow, I can put a set of single coil Fender pickups in a guitar, which you'll normally, in any environment, you'll hear a slight buzz to them. Plug mine in, no noise at all. And it all has to do with the way that I run the wiring, which acts as a noise canceling system. And it also has to do with the way that I shield it. You have to have a complete ground shield, a complete Faraday cage inside the guitar. And I'm going to show you all how to do that kind of thing. So when we get done with all of these little lesson videos, you will have all that you need to know to build the absolute best sounding electric guitar that you can build, or to modify your own. And then the next thing beyond that will be for me to show you some of my tricks and how I set it up and make it play like it does. So I appreciate everybody watching the video. So go, when you get on my YouTube, hit the like, hit the subscribe, spread the words, share it out there to people. We want to try to get this thing to grow. So please do that. And I appreciate y'all very much. And I'll see you on the weekend. Bye.